Professor Ibrahim Gambari is Nigeria's longest-serving ambassador and permanent representative to the United Nations. He has chaired several committees such as the UN Special Committee Against Apartheid and the UN Special Committee on Peacekeeping Operations, and has led numerous diplomatic missions on behalf of the UN. He is also the founder of the Savannah Center for Diplomacy, Democracy and Development. Professor Gambari received his education at the London School of Economics and Columbia University. A dedicated educator himself, he has taught both in New York and at home in Nigeria, where he founded the first undergraduate program in international studies at the university in Zaria. As author of 3 books on politics and with 2 more on the way, Professor Gambari is truly an esteemed scholar and diplomat. And now it gives me great pleasure to invite Professor Gambari to deliver his keynote address. Professor Gambari, please.
The Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Singapore, and I can truly drop names by saying he's my friend, Mr. George Yeo. Your Excellencies, distinguished faculty, staff of NUS, and participants in the World Model UN Conference, ladies and gentlemen, and dear friends. In the introduction that you just had, I was referred to rightly as the longest-serving Nigerian ambassador to the UN. I want to assure you that it has nothing to do with my competence. It's just Nigeria doesn't know what to do with me if I have to return home. So I'm still out of Nigeria. I'm very pleased to be here with you today to share ideas and exchange views on the challenges of multilateralism in addressing regional conflicts in today's unipolar world, almost unipolar world. I therefore wish to thank again the organizers of this conference for their kind invitation, and especially the co-presidents, particularly Shabir Allah and her father, who first suggested my name to be considered to be considered as the keynote speaker for this event. I also look forward to engaging with you on the role of the United Nations in today's international system. But first, I wanted to share with you my thoughts on the challenges of mediation in regional conflicts and the imperatives of multilateralism. I chose this because I am currently involved on behalf of the United Nations and the African Union in trying to bring this dreadful conflict in Darfur to an end. A conflict which is not even just in one country, it's in a part of the country, Sudan, but with huge regional dimensions. May I just say as a caveat that I'm able to speak candidly to you today because the views I'm about to express should not be construed as necessarily representing those of the United Nations organization, because it might disown some of what I'm about to say. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the world today is unstable and feels so. Our television screens are filled with images of turmoil and unrest accompanied by national, community, and personal insecurity. Just 20 years ago, a leading American scholar, Francis Fukuyama, wrote a famous article titled, quote, "The End of History," end of quote, arguing that the end of the Cold War had signaled the final triumph of liberal democracy over totalitarianism and of free market economics over command economics. The people who criticized him at that time said any talk of the end of history is the beginning of nonsense. The reality, as a matter of fact, has turned out to be much different from the time that Fukuyama published his article. Since then, the world has witnessed new challenges such as 9/11, global terrorism, and the emergence of conflicts of unique complexity in view of their intrastate more than interstate nature. In this context, today's Arab awakening is equally destabilizing, although it does hold the prospect of long-term democratization and liberty, not only for the Arab world, but even beyond. As we look across the globe, we see disputes over natural resources, over identity, over religious affiliation, as well as over access to power. And these are fuel conflicts which involve guerrilla warfare, homegrown as well as foreign-sponsored militias, mercenaries, and forced recruitment of civilians, particularly children as soldiers. In addition, they evolved in an environment where neighbors and regional countries have vested interests and were supporting one, if not multiple parties to the conflict. Furthermore, these conflicts proved to have an impact beyond the concerned fighting areas as refugees fled to neighboring states, armed guerrillas find outpour across borders, and an economy of war created financial incentives that undermined possible peace settlement. Despite progress made in resolving many conflicts in the world, it is regrettable that the most looming and devastating conflict with regional dimensions has taken place largely in my own continent, Africa. Until recently, I highlighted how Central Africa and the Greater Horn were the most worrisome regions of the chronic instability. Regrettably, I may need to reconsider adding North Africa, re-emphasizing West Africa, especially Côte d'Ivoire, which is about to return to civil war. And then you have conflicts that have multiple dimensions. They are interconnected and transcend borders or specific territories, thus making them truly regional. This is particularly the case in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where fighting involved militias from Rwanda, from Uganda and Burundi, several rebellion groups, and the government of the DRC itself. It's also the case in Sudan, where the North-South conflict seems to be ending through the implementation of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, CPA, and the recently concluded referendum, but the security situation therefore remains challenging. It is further regrettable to note that these conflicts have claimed millions of lives, left millions more displaced, and undermined possible economic growth and prosperity in a continent that is behind others in socio-economic development. The chronic insecurity has put severe constraints on access to humanitarian aid for the millions in need. In these wars, civilians are not only victims, but have increasingly become targets. And women and children in particular bear the heaviest burdens of instability and fighting. From rape and displacement to the denial of the right to education, to food and to healthcare, women and children bear the largest share of suffering. However, this should never be an acceptable reality, and it is our common responsibility and shared interest to bring these conflicts with their awful impact on vulnerable civilian populations to an end and ensure that sufficient preventive measures are in place to avoid their resumption or emergence. As the Joint Special Representative for the African Union, United Nations Peacekeeping Operation, therefore otherwise known as UNAMI, and which is the first of its kind in the history of international peacekeeping. Before, you would have a regional peacekeeping mission or a UN mission. Often the UN takes over from the regional one, but in this case, you have what they call a hybrid mission of two organizations deploying the same peacekeeping mission. In fact, I'm often referred to as a hybrid special representative, some kind of a strange concoction. But this is the biggest international peacekeeping effort in the world. When fully deployed, it will be 31,000 soldiers and police and civilians. And it's also the most expensive, costing about $1.8 billion a year. So I want to just briefly touch upon the case of Darfur and the main challenges that they illustrate of international peacekeeping, especially when there's yet no peace to keep. In the famous Brahimian report, which made a comprehensive evaluation of peacekeeping operations in the world, it was stipulated that UN missions should deploy when there is a comprehensive peace agreement to implement. But in the case of Darfur, there was so much international interest in the suffering of the people of Darfur, including through some movie actors, famous movie actors, that it was decided that despite the fact that there is no peace to keep, peacekeeping missions should be sent anyway, so as to do two things. Provide protection to the civilian population, particularly the most vulnerable, women and children, and also facilitate the delivery of humanitarian assistance to those in need. But as I speak, there is still widespread insecurity in Darfur and incessant fighting leading to protracted humanitarian challenge. About 1.8 million people are living in IDP camps, and this is obviously unsustainable in the long term. There's also lack of trust and confidence between the international community and the UN on one hand, and the government of Sudan on the other. You will recall, some of you may be following the situation closely, that President Bashir of Sudan has been indicted by the International Criminal Court as a war criminal, in part or largely because of the action of his government in Darfur. And yet, I have to work with him as the head of the largest international peacekeeping mission in the world, despite the fact that he is indicted. So, I need to work with a government that has no trust and confidence in the UN, and in whom the UN has little trust and confidence in. But that's one reality that I have to deal with. In fact, I should tell you a true story. President Bashir was elected president in April, the first competitive election in 25 years of Sudan's history. And there was a debate in the UN whether I should attend the ceremony or not, since how can I attend the ceremony of a president who is indicted? But the African Union, my other boss, said, well, we have no problem with Bashir. He's president of the country in good standing. You should attend. So I don't know how to attend and not attend at the same time. And then the UN also said, if you have to attend, which they finally decided, please don't smile at the ceremony. So I want to see myself enjoying the event. And the African Union said, please smile. So again, I have to learn how to smile and not smile at the same time. But it really illustrates some of the complexities of running this mission. Then, of course, you have a proliferation of armed movement. At one time, 25 armed movements and the government. And then, of course, between the Darfurians and the government, the mistrust between the Darfurians and the government, because, of course, they claim that the government is responsible for their misery, for over 300,000 dead, 1.8 million internally displaced. And clearly, I need both to build trust between the government and the Darfurians, between the armed movement and the government, between the UN, African Union, and the government of Sudan, in order to really make a success of this operation. I also like to mention the fact that the Darfur crisis is influenced by countries in the region. Sudan has 9 neighbors, 9, including Egypt, including Libya. The multiplicity of parties involved, the divergent interests, the various patrons, that are made negotiating a peace agreement more complicated, more complex, thereby underlining the need for reinforcing multilateral, coherent, and coordinated engagement to achieve any sustainable settlement. But in this context, if you look at previous and ongoing regional conflicts, they offer 3 main lessons that I believe should guide the world with regard to this crisis and how to prevent them. And I'll touch very briefly on them. First, that security should be regarded as a collective responsibility which requires collective action. Because in a world in which armed conflict between or within states, which have political, military, economic, humanitarian, and environmental consequences far beyond conflict zone, a world where deadly weapons, including weapons of mass destruction, can be obtained not only by rogue states, but also non-state actors, and by extremist groups, we have to pay attention to what is happening in any part of the world. A threat to peace anywhere should be considered a threat to peace everywhere, thereby requiring collective action. The second lesson is that states is the need for global solidarity. We have to hold ourselves accountable to and responsible for each other's welfare. Without a measure of solidarity, no society can be truly stable and no prosperity is truly secure. It was the Second Secretary General, the Council, who elegantly puts it as in the following way. He said, quote, no one can expect his garden to remain tidy by reserving a spot for weeds, end of quotation. Because ultimately, the weed is going to overwhelm the tidiness of your garden. And this perspective was echoed by the immediate past Secretary General Prof in a recent Dublin conference to mark World Food Day, Food's Day, when he said that, and I quote, the only way we can be secure, the only way we can feel safe, the only way we can prosper together is by working together. And the third main lesson from addressing this regional conflict is the need for respect for human rights, democracy, and rule of law. And my friend, Foreign Minister Jojo, pointed out a rule-based international system is the best guarantee for each other's rights security and prosperity. In this regard, you remember it was Secretary General Gali who argued in the seminal report, An Agenda for Peace. He argued that there can be no development without peace. And this is very true of Africa. One of the main reasons for Africa's underdevelopment is that it's the continent with the highest level of conflict. And then he followed this with a second agenda, an agenda for development, in which he argued that there can be no durable peace without sustainable development. And then it was Prof who added the third dimension by arguing that there will neither be peace nor development without democracy and the respect for the human rights of peoples. And that is where the imperative of multilateralism comes in. Effective collective action on peace, on development, on democracy, on human rights requires strong multilateral engagement. In this context, only the United Nations stands with the needed capacity, the needed expertise, and the needed experience in coordinating global efforts. However, this will require continued commitment by member states to address both current and the challenges facing the UN. Here, I would like to quote Lord Carradine, who was a former British ambassador to UN, who famously said, and I quote, "There is nothing wrong with the UN except with its member states." End of quotation. So when you say, why doesn't the UN do this? Why doesn't it do that? Why is it doing this wrongly? You have to attribute it to what the behavior of the member states are. In other words, actions by the United Nations are only as strong and as effective as member states want them to be by providing the needed support, including through regional and sub-regional organizations such as the African Union, ASEAN, and others. Now, they need a lot of help. For example, on the peace and security front, the UN is engaged now in about 30 peace operations around the world, including 18 peacekeeping operations, of which Darfur, UNAMID is just one, with more than 100,000 personnel, the largest number since the creation of the UN more than 60 years ago. But the UN should not just be about peacekeeping, it should be about peacemaking, about preventive action. And so we have to work on early warning and early action, and also to ripen some conflicts for resolution and then try to resolve them. And that is why during the time that I was briefly Under-Secretary General for the Department of Political Affairs, we considered the issue of having a standby team of mediators. When it comes to peacekeeping, we have standby forces. We do training for the peacekeepers, the soldiers, and the police who are going to go. But when it comes to peacemaking and mediation, we don't have a standby team of people who are qualified, experienced, and ready on the ready to go. So I set up this so-called mediation support unit, and I'm glad to see that that seems to be growing. And that is where I feel also support for the UN depends on the influence that people like you, academicians, civil society groups, the participants in the World Model UN needs to promote awareness of the imperative for multilateralism and to try to promote support for and deepen interest in terms of the activities of the UN with all the imperfections. So, coming to a conclusion then, I've attempted in these short remarks to demonstrate that today's conflicts, particularly those with regional dimensions, tend to be complex and complicated. They could only be solved through coherent, coordinated, and firm engagement by the international community through the UN. In this context, the United Nations is a legitimate and an essential multilateral partner to find peaceful and political solutions to conflicts around the world which have regional dimension and which have the capacity to poison international relations as a whole. Indeed, I think it is a fair thing to say that if the United Nations did not exist, we would have had to invent it. So why invent something, try to invent something that exists? Let us try to make it work. But in order for it to work, with the support of member states, the UN must build a much more mediation and preventive capacity. So, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, participants at the World Model UN Conference, I would like to say in closing that the engagement of the United Nations is absolutely crucial to conflict prevention, conflict management, as well as conflict resolution, in addition to peace building through the activities of the specialized agencies and others, through humanitarian assistance, through sustainable development, and through institutional capacity building. We all have a stake in the outcome of the work of the UN. The UN is far too important to be left to the Secretariat members alone, the Secretary General and the Secretary Generals. It's too important even to be left to member states alone. It is only together, acting as one, all of us, that we will bring about change to the United Nations, and therefore change to our world, and therefore foster the right environment for all communities to live in peace, in security, and in prosperity, and in freedom. I thank you very much.
Hi, this is Justin reporting from CNN at the WorldMUN 2011. This is the end of the opening ceremony of the WorldMUN 2011 here in Singapore at the National University of Singapore. Justin reporting for CNN WorldMUN 2011. Thank you.